What's good, guys? Just wanted to share the dodge build I like to run along with some tips and tricks for assault. So this guide is going to be mostly aimed at Tyranids operations. I won't really be covering anything at all for chaos. So now that that's out of the way, let's jump right into it. So whenever I run Tyranid operations, I like to run the Block Thunder Hammer along with the Heavy Bolt Pistol with the ammo variants. And for the weapon perks, I won't really be going into details as they're pretty standard. I think most people run the same thing as I do. So here is what I use for the bolt pistol, and for the thunder hammer, same thing, pretty self-explanatory. I pretty much always use the same perks for weapons. Alright, so now moving on to class perks. In the core perks, armor reinforcement is pretty much mandatory for the dodge build. If you're playing this build well, you should be getting a lot of gun strikes from perfect dodges. So this is where most of your survivability will be coming from. And this is basically the perk that is going to keep you alive. On the second row of core perks, you can either go for auxiliary arsenal or consecutive execution. Me, whenever I solo, I like to go for auxiliary arsenal as I get much more value out of this perk, since I'm using my pistol a lot more than I would in team play. However, when I'm playing with other players online, I like to go for consecutive execution as I'm not as reliant on my secondary weapon. But honestly, you can go for either one. They're both good perks. So it's really up to personal preference. For the third core perk, I always run Knowledge of the Enemy. So this perk, alongside the Precision Strike, allows you to one-hit Majoris enemies with Ground Pound. And also, Knowledge of the Enemy is just a good perk in general to have for more damage against Majoris or Extremis enemies. Team perks, always go for Proven Efficiency. You've probably noticed by now that this build pretty much revolves around gun strikes, and just in general, this is probably the best team perk that Assault has in my opinion. For gear perks, like I said earlier, Precision Strike, it allows you to one-hit Majoris enemies with Ground Pound, and also it allows you to one-hit Extremis enemies if you have Adrenaline Surge stacked up. Now, for the last three perks, these are pretty much a must-have for the dodge build. So Wings of Flames, it pretty much allows you to perfect dodge anything with your jump pack, and whenever you do, it sets up a gun strike and it actually does pretty decent damage. For the last perk in the gear perks, you want to go for Aerial Grace. This gives you a 30% damage boost, and as far as I'm aware, it works on everything, so your gun strikes after a jump pack dodge should also do more damage, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm pretty sure that's how it works. And finally, for the signature perk, you want to go with Commitment. So this is what allows you to regain a jump back charge following a perfect dodge. And in some cases, you can actually regain 2 charges at once if you're able to dodge 2 attacks simultaneously. But versus Tyranids, there's actually a way that you can pretty consistently regain 2 charges, and I'll be going over that later on in the video. Before going to tips and tricks, I'd like to go over some pros and cons of using the dodge build over, let's say, a more standard assault build with Zealous Blow. And while I talk, I'll just throw on some gameplay footage in the background. Now, the biggest advantage in my opinion, as I've said multiple times earlier, is the improved survivability. Normally, there's always some kind of trade-off where you lose some damage for more survivability, but that's not really the case here, which is what makes this build so good in my opinion. You also have much more mobility, as you'll be able to reposition much easier with the jump pack dodges. And if you're using this build correctly, you'll be perfectly dodging, so you shouldn't be losing any ability charges. Now, the biggest drawback I see with this build is that you lose the ability to spam ground pounds with Zealous Blow. And what makes Zealous Blow so great is that you can clear out the hordes of Majoris with pretty much no effort at all. But at higher difficulties, these enemies aren't really a threat. And on top of that, if you're using the Thunder Hammer, you can clear them out pretty easily with Aftershock, as long as you position well and you don't get surrounded. Also, you lose the ability to charge your jump pack on kills, so you'll have to use your ground pound much more deliberately. But aside from these 2 points, I can't really think of any other downsides. Alright, let's get into some tips and tricks. The first one I wanted to share with you guys is how you can regain 2 ability charges. And as far as I know, the only enemy this works on is the Tyranid Warrior with the Whip. One of the attack the Whip Warrior throws has 2 quick consecutive attacks. So in order to do this, you don't want to be too close. You need some distance between you and him. And once he throws his blue attack, you'll want to block the first hit, and then you'll want to jump pack dodge the second attack. You'll need to time it a little bit, as if you do it too early, you won't be able to perfect dodge the second hit since you'll be outside of his hitbox. I'll add a clip to showcase how it's done. Now for the second tip, if you need to regain armor quickly, the best way to do it is to do with a dash attack against Majoris enemies. So what you want to do is you want to pommel strike, you cancel the animation with parry, and then immediately after you trigger your gun strike. What this will do is that it'll cut out the end of the pommel strike animation and it'll allow you to get a gun strike out much faster. Also, if you have adrenaline surge stacked up, the best way to proc it is also with pommel strike. Since most attacks with the hammer are really slow, if you're in a pinch and you need armor back as soon as possible, this is your best option. Next up, I want to talk about target priority and positioning. On Tyranid maps, the number one enemy you want to look out for are the Devourers. They're the ones that shoot out those volley of spikes. And on higher difficulties, they are the biggest threat. So if possible, you should always go for them first. Just to be safe, I often waste a jump back charge just to kill them. And then there's the snipers and the barbed stranglers. So the best way to deal with ranged Majoris is pretty much to go up to them and melee them. If they retaliate with a melee attack, you can simply go for a jump back dodge and a gun strike, and normally that should be enough to put them in execute range. One thing you have to look out for though is when they get enraged, you don't want to stay in melee range when that happens, so that's when you'll want to take your distance and use your pistol to take them out, or even just a ground pound. If you can get to them, then you'll want to position yourself between objects or walls so that they can't hit you. Now for melee Majoris, these are the enemies that make dodge builds so fun in my opinion. I'll put up some different combinations on the screen and you'll get a general idea, but you have so many options when it comes to dealing with them. But the best ones to go against are the whip ones. The Bone Warriors can be a pain sometimes with their defensive stance since they get no damage at all, but with dodge build, you can just wait for them to attack, and once they do, you just jump pack, and the Wings of Flame damage plus the gun strike damage should be enough to get them close to execution range. Something to remember also is that everything that can be dodged by the jump pack dash can also be dodged normally. Since Assault has a passive perk that gives him a plus 50% perfect dodge window, you should use it to your advantage. For positioning, the most important thing is to not get surrounded. You always want the enemies in a single direction. You don't want to jump pack into the middle of a horde as you'll just get overwhelmed and you'll probably end up dying. You should always try to position yourself where you'll be able to have cover from range damage, and if it's not possible, you'll have to make it a priority to take out the ranged enemies. If you're able to position well and don't charge into fights blindly, I promise you, you'll be dying a lot less, and this is valid on any class in the game. Another thing to keep in mind is when to use ability. I generally try to always have at least one jump back charge so I can continuously use it, but you have to be careful when using the dash with Wings of Flames, because if an enemy has sustained quite some damage already, you might put it into execute range and you won't be getting a charge back. And this is something that still happens to me quite often, and in these cases, it's much better to just use a normal dodge instead of wasting an ability charge. The best way to get a feel for this, honestly, is just to do a couple of runs with this build and pretty much experience it yourself. I know some people have issues with the jump back dodge not triggering the perfect dodge, and that's because your character model has to go through the attack for it to work. So the best way to do it is to basically dodge towards the attack. And finally, I wanted to end the video with some general assault tips. These are some things that have probably happened to you if you've ever played the class. So if you're ever locked on by a sniper, you do not want to make the mistake of ground pounding towards them, because whenever you use the jump pack, it is considered as a dodge, and in case you didn't know, the snipers will shoot whenever you perform a dodge. So if you're going to dive towards them, they will instantly shoot you. Now, if you're already in midair, you'll probably want to switch target, or you'll have to waste your jump pack and ground pound into nothing at all. However, if you're healthy, you can try and go for it, as you should be able to execute it right away, but sometimes you'll get knocked back and lose some contested health before you're going to be able to execute. So overall, still a very risky play. Another one that I'm sure has happened to every assault player out there is that you'll try to jump pack, but your character just won't fly up. And that pretty much happened because your yellow indicator is not showing. And you can only jump into the air when that indicator is present. This has gotten me killed a lot of times, and I had to learn this the hard way, but you cannot jump pack unless that yellow indicator is present. Speaking of the yellow indicator, you can cover a lot more distance with your jump pack the further that indicator is. So basically what that means is that by simply tilting your camera higher, the indicator should also move further away from you, and this will allow you to travel longer distances without having to walk up. Alright, so this about wraps it up. If you have any other helpful tips, feel free to drop them in the comments. That's it from me. Thanks for watching.